Yeah, I think it'd be really funny. You just like walk downstairs in the morning, your doctor's sitting down there drinking coffee. It's like, hey, what's up? Heard you and your wife arguing last night. You want to tell me more about it?
Yeah, let me take your blood pressure. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. That's perfect.
Everybody knows that your diet and exercise can have huge implications on your overall health. But did you know that your relationships can affect your overall health just as much? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today on The Prescription Press, the podcast where we break down trending medical topics so we can live longer and healthier lives. I'm your host, Nolan Fisher. I'm a physician who believes that a healthy lifestyle is the best medication. I'm joined today by my co-host, Sam Stix.
What's going on, brother? How you doing, man?
I'm good, man. I'm good. You know,
Good.
It's sunny
Good
here
stuff.
in Cleveland. House is a wreck. We're moving to Phoenix. Jenna and I are doing a bunch of packing, but you know, it's going to be good. It's going to be good. Unfortunately, we're leaving the beautiful Cleveland summer to head to 120-degree heat. But when it comes January, man, we're going to be living.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Can't wait to visit. It's going to be good.
I'm excited, man. Hey, I got something to tell you about.
Let's hear it.
It's this new thing that Jenna and I have been doing with our friends here.
Okay.
And we have two friends named Jamie and Eric, and we hang out with them. They're at our wedding. You met them. Every Thursday, we've been going out and doing something with them. So a couple Thursdays ago, we met up at this cocktail bar. We had some food, had some fancy cocktails during happy hour. It was a great time. And we were having so much fun while we were doing it. We went the next week to this truck park, and it's just like essentially an outdoor venue, beautiful outside, all these food trucks and picnic tables. And we brought our dog, and it was a great time. And Jenna and I were just talking about like how much better life is whenever you have these rituals like that, right? And I think one of the things that happens, especially as we get older and we move into our careers and with moving to new places, is you don't have these relationships, right? And you actually have to work to build them. Mm-hmm. And definitely when we are growing up, we're kind of put around people, right, to have those relationships. Well, as adults, you aren't naturally put around people your age. You may work with people that are your age, but you may work with people that are much older than you as well. And so I noticed that there was just so much, like I got so much joy out of doing this that I started thinking about how it impacts our overall health. And I heard about this podcast. I actually just ended up stumbling upon it. It's called Feel Better, Live More by a doc named Rangan Chatterjee. He's from the UK. He was a general practitioner and he has a huge podcast over there. Really interesting. Had you heard his podcast before?
I'm not sure. I feel like I've seen maybe clips of his. Maybe he's at like kind of some cross pollination with like the Joe Rogans of the world, potentially like the big podcasters, possibly. I want to say he sounded familiar to me, to be honest. Before I listened.
He has a like very like a voice that you're like, oh, I feel like I know this guy. Like I feel like I've heard this guy before. He sounds famous when he talks, and it may just be because he's from the UK. Who knows? That's how they all are apparently. But he had two guests on, a guy named Robert Waldinger and Marc Schulz. They wrote a book called The Good Life, Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study of Happiness. And what it looks like is they're kind of doing the tour. Like they're doing the press tour to promote the book, but it's really fascinating. So of course I listened to the episode, but I also Googled them. And as it turns out, this Robert Waldinger gave a TED Talk a few years ago about the same topic that had like 21 million views. So I'd been missing out on this. I wish I'd stumbled upon it sooner. But I stumbled upon it now. And their work that they're known for and that they talked about in this book was from a Harvard study that started in 1938. And it essentially was the combination of two different studies. One was a study that followed people from a very affluent background that were like high achievers in school. And I believe they were going to Ivy League school. And then the other followed people from a very poor and like troubled background. And the idea of the study was that they were going to follow them over the course of their lives and see how their relationships impact their lives. Well, initially, I'm sure they were not expecting this to last as long as it has, but it's still going on. And that they have had like 5 different directors of the study. They've continually got more funding. And what started as a bunch of men from either a fluent background or poor background has turned into not only following those people, but following their spouses, following their children, following those around them. And it doesn't just talk about how hasn't just taken into account their surveys that they give them, but also they've done health data on them, like labs and stuff like that. So it's really cool. It has a particular focus on relationships, happiness, and then their overall health outcomes. Really fascinating study. And I have some takeaways. So, first one, frequency and quality of relationships matter. By frequency, it's how often you see the person. And then quality, they said, think about of as like the depth of that relationship. And so, we don't really think about how often we see those or like schedule it. And it made me think about scheduling this every Thursday routine and how much happier it made us scheduling that. And it was just like increasing that frequency is so important. We all have like quality relationships, but like how happy does it make you if you really have a quality relationship with somebody, but you never see them, Yeah,
no doubt.
And so they also said, so it's about having the frequency and the quality of relationships, but you also have to have one, what they called secure relationship, which they said is typically a spouse, but it doesn't always have to be.
Yeah.
And for human nature, this kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah. No, totally. They definitely talked about that. I guess they said one or two kind of securely attached was the terminology they used. Relationships. And I guess another way to look at this is like, who would you call if you were in trouble? Like, do you have somebody you could go to, whether that's obviously a spouse, a family member, a close friend, whoever, like somebody who you really know you can count on unequivocally. So, yeah.
Yeah. How about the fact that they said that 20 to 30 or is 20 to 30 or 20 to 40% of adults, I think, 20 to 40% of adults don't have a single person that they could call in a crisis.
Yeah.
And that a huge percentage of those people were married and they didn't feel like they could call their spouse in a crisis.
And I know that definitely shocked me. I mean, it kind of probably maybe put things in perspective and realized I'm pretty lucky to have the relationships and the friendships and things that I do, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Yeah. And that's the thing. We only see the world through our lens. So you just assume other people have that, but
I know.
Yeah, it's wild. And then they said a similar percent, so somewhere in that 30% range, reports significant loneliness. And that's a number that's increased. That number wasn't always that high. It seems like it's steadily increasing and now it's at a peak. Or they don't know if it's a peak. I mean, it may just be getting higher.
Yeah.
So the impact of that loneliness was fascinating, right?
Oh,
so
totally.
Loneliness is as bad for your health as your overall health outcomes as smoking or obesity.
Yeah, I know, man. That's absolutely crazy.
Shocking.
I know. And, you kind of start to tie this back into like depression and stuff too. I think we saw like about 20% or so of adults were depressed as well. It's like, well, it makes sense. If you're depressed, like there's probably a strong correlation there as well. Like you probably don't have people to count on and stuff. And like, I think back to the time
20% with chronic pain.
Yeah.
This is all tied up. It's the physical,
really
the mental, the social. We really get to see this all tied up,
Yeah. No, it's crazy. It's crazy to see like the tangible effects that I guess loneliness kind of had on your health too. I know like they talked about relationships specifically, and they talked about how having a positive marital relationship, that actually has a greater effect on people's longevity than like cholesterol levels, for example. So that was another thing. I was just like, oh wow, there's like real tangible results. I'm like, it makes sense, I suppose. Like you said, all those positive emotions and things, it makes you not maybe think about your problems as much that you might have, and allows you to kind of live your life more freely, I guess. Another thing that I thought this was mind blowing to me was the wound healing results. So like they said that dementia patients healed slower. Obviously, if you have dementia, you're not going to be connected to anyone in a really deep, meaningful way.
Yeah.
So they talked about people who had strong marriages actually healed faster. So I guess they used some sort of like a small puncture wound, and they basically measured how long it took to heal.
Yeah.
And there was like a very strong correlation between the quality of your relationships and how fast you heal. That one just like was crazy to me.
Yeah. I think they used a punch biopsy. And so it's almost like a hole punch for your skin. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And they measured the healing. It was crazy. They also, I think what's also interesting. We talked about the positive marital relationship is so beneficial.
Yeah.
But the negative marital relationship has a profoundly detrimental effect on your overall health as well. So
Totally.
there's the positive and the negative, right? And then, talking about dementia patients, yeah, it makes sense that maybe they have poor blood flow as well, but there was more to it than just that. And they had overall worse healing. Definitely, if you don't have your relationships as well, you think maybe your stress is higher, or maybe your overall level of depression is higher, and you see that can definitely affect your physiology.
Yeah.
So I'm not surprised. Another thing they said in this podcast was that the most frequent regrets of these initial participants when they were 80 years old. And so I think it was the initial participants and their wives when they turned 80, they surveyed them. And the overall was not enough time spent with friends and family and spending too much time at work.
Yeah.
Which absolutely makes sense. But do we take that into account and like live it out on a day-to-day basis?
Exactly.
Right?
Like, do you take that to heart truly? Yeah.
Like it's interesting. You hear it, but you hear it from 80-year-olds, but do you put that into practice? It made me really think about that.
I know. Even now, like being 30 and like looking back, it's like when I was first starting my career off, right? And I was like, 22, 23. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna hit the ground running. Like, I'm going to just like dedicate everything to my career. I'm going to become a millionaire. I want to do this, want to do that. Like, I was hyper focused on that. Like, that's all I cared about. Right. And then I actually got to work and I'm like, all right, so who are these people who make a ton of money? Like, who are the people at my company who are doing really well? Yeah. Like, they have the corner offices and they got like the actual, I'm in a cubicle. Like, they got the real setup over there. And I'm like,
they got that BMW.
Yeah, exactly.
That Mercedes.
Exactly. Yeah, they got that 6 and 7 Series. I'm like, that's awesome. And then you look at them and they're like you get to work and you realize they've been there for a while. Like, they're on their second or third cup of coffee when you get there. And then you leave and those lights are still on in that office and you see them walk by and they just look stressed. They look miserable at times. And you're just like, man, is that what I want for my life? Right. I think that's an interesting thing too. It's like evaluating, like, what do you really want for your life at the end of the day? Like, take a look at the people who hold those positions of power and see if you truly want to take that on. And a lot of people do. And to be honest, I'm kind of envious of the people who want that. Like, I'm like, I wish I had that desire to kind of hold those positions, because they seem sometimes like, it almost seems like they're so locked on like this greater goal. And it's like at times I've struggled with that. Like, what is my overall direction that I'm kind of going towards? But it's like, you have to really be able to like self-reflect and self-evaluate and be like, is like are the benefits of holding that position really going to be beneficial for my overall well-being at the end of the day? So I don't know. I still don't have the answer, to be honest with you, but it's just an interesting perspective.
No, I 100% agree. So whenever I was younger, I did this and I haven't done it in a while, but I sat down and I wrote out like, what are my desired outcomes over the next, say 5-10 years, right? Okay. Like what's my ideal vision?
Yeah.
And I heard somebody talking about this recently. I'm not really sure where, but I think that most people don't ever sit down and do that. I mean, I'm positive that most people don't ever sit down and do that. Yeah. And you wonder how many of these people in the study ever sat down and really thought about what they want, or they just went and they lived life and then they looked back at 80 years old and somebody finally asked them and they were like, damn, I spent way too much time at work.
Totally. No, I'm curious. Right. How old were you when you did that? I'm curious. Was that
so? I did it whenever I was. I don't want to say maybe like it was probably like 5, 6, 7 years ago when I was early on in medical school. Yeah. And I don't think I was like emotionally mature enough to really have that, hit the ground and like impact my life. Yeah. And then going through residency. And then, of course, I'm graduating on Wednesday. So for me, it was like, okay, I'm looking at this next chapter in my life. Jenna and I are moving to Arizona. I'm starting a fellowship and I'm working as well as a full physician. I was like, what do I want to see for myself? And so I just broke down into some domains that I thought were important in my life. And so I looked at overall health, relationships, career, and then I kind of had like a miscellaneous type thing. Okay. And so, there was a lot of things like what you would expect. You want to be in great shape. Well, what does that look like? Like I want to be able to run a marathon, right? I want to be able to be flexible enough by doing things like yoga so I can tie my shoes and not have my back hurt on a day-to-day basis. Right. I think that's like a good thing.
Yeah.
And then overall having good, like clean eating habits. And then like, you know, there's other stuff like relationships, you know, being, of course, keeping our marriage as strong as possible. That's like number one.
Oh yeah.
Having good social relationships around us. Something that Jen and I talked about was like, when we move to Phoenix, we're going to make a concerted effort to become involved in whatever community we're part of, you know, whether it's our gym, whether it's our work community, friends we make around there. I think that's important. And then when it comes to career, it's like, okay, well, what do I want out of my career? You know, what kind of financial goals do I have? And why do I have those financial goals? And then taking all that stuff and breaking that into shorter term things that you can do. And I think ultimately I'm going to try to take all these pieces and break them into like daily things that I can do to work on it and see how it works.
Yeah. No, it's interesting.
And I think that, I just think that most people don't do that. And as I was doing it, really, it was like hard, you know, it makes you think about what you actually want. And you're like, sometimes you realize you're like, I don't know.
Oh yeah. 100%.
Right. Like, just like you said, you know, well, you see those people at your company that are making a lot of money and you're like, I want that. Wait, no, I don't. Well, I'm not actually sure.
Yeah, I know, man. It's really, really true. And then you're like, you know, I want that, but like, is there another way to achieve that? Is there another way to achieve those things? Like, they probably still have an immense sense of satisfaction that they get from like doing a great job at work, which I totally am envious of. Because like, you know, I'm in a position now where it's like, I care about my work and I always want to do a good job, but it's like, I don't really necessarily have like that next goal, like 2 or 3 steps down the line, like a clear vision of what I want to be doing it from a corporate sense. So it's like, you know, what are some other things I can get involved in that I might be more passionate about, that I can maybe earn some money doing and still get that full sense of fulfillment. So I don't know. It's like I said, I don't have any answers over here, but it's
no, it's great. But that specific part of the study, the regrets of the 80-year-olds, made me think about that. And it was like, okay, I want to have a vision, because I don't want to get to 80 years old and be filled with regret.
No, totally.
That just, sounds horrible.
Yeah.
The other thing that they mentioned, so since it started out with a lot of males mostly, they said that the regrets of women particularly were they wish that they wouldn't have cared so much about whether people thought about them. Made me think of social media a little bit.
Oh, totally.
Because there's a whole generation that's concerned. And they said this is less divergent between the sexes, and it's actually coming more and more the same problems. And it's what people care about you. And I think in a social media culture where we're obsessed with likes and stuff like that, and everybody's life looks perfect, I think there's going to be a lot of people from our generation and the generations below us that look back in 50 years and they wish they wouldn't have cared what people thought about them so much.
Yeah, totally. I think more so now than ever. I think probably men care about what people think as well. Yeah. Probably like, you know, I've even had conversations with my dad recently about just like how the world's changed over the last 50 years and stuff. And it's like you realize some of the thoughts that we have on a regular basis, like we're not even on his radar at all. And it's like, you know, there's a certain piece of him that feels like he kind of missed out on some stuff by not being old, by not being a little bit younger. But at the same time, I'm like, man, I'm kind of jealous and envious of him that he didn't have to think about some of the things that we have to think about in this modern society for sure. So it's interesting.
Yeah. And then a couple other things that I just were random notes that I thought were interesting. So they talked about in-person versus remote work.
Yeah.
And the benefits, the drawbacks of each. They talked about working remotely, how work ends up infiltrating your home life, and that the commute kind of creates the separation between the two, which I thought was interesting, that creating the separation between, you know, work and your home life. But then there are some people that say that if you are always, you know, having your job wrapped up in your family, like the family business, that seems to bring people a lot of joy. So I kind of question that a bit.
Yeah.
And then my favorite idea that like sounds amazing that I've never implemented, but it sounds ideal to me, is the idea of the Sabbath, where it's just 1 day per week. You go without work or technology, and you just focus on these real in-person interactions. Of course, taken from the Jewish Sabbath, but you could make that the technology Sabbath, you know, You could make that the work Sabbath. And I think this would be really beneficial for a lot of people, especially if you're either wrapped up in social media, or you're the type of person that's wrapped up in work, just spending a day a week strengthening those relationships and detaching from that stuff that may be causing stress.
No doubt, man. I totally agree.
Yeah. And then, of course, saying bad things about social media. Well, they had some good things to say about social media, too. And that was the fact that it actually can be beneficial for your relationships. And there is some research showing that, but you have to curate it, right?
Yeah, totally.
I don't think that's something that most people don't do. I know I certainly should curate my social media better.
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of curious. I know I was going to kind of ask you this kind of maybe when we wrapped up, but I guess since we're on the subject right now, I know that you are someone who kind of deleted your social media. Like you went cold turkey, just off social media a few years ago. And I'm sure at the time, like, I think probably the reason you brought it back is kind of because you've got like interested in this podcast and interested in your YouTube like series that you're creating and stuff like that. I'm sure that's probably the biggest driving force for kind of why you're back on social media. But I don't know. I mean, are you finding yourself kind of consuming more social media now than I guess you were previously as well? I mean, I guess if you were doing nothing before, you're obviously consuming more, but I mean, what kind of emotions are you experiencing as you're kind of spending more time on social media?
So I went without it for a while. I deleted like everything and it was really good. The problem is like, what do you replace it with? And I replaced a lot of it with like watching YouTube videos, basically.
Okay.
But I think it overall had like a net beneficial effect. I just figured as I was going on with my career, like I wanted to implement social media into it and I wanted to be more involved. And I thought, there's probably a beneficial way that I could do this. And so definitely I have felt that like I've been consuming more than I'd like to, but definitely I have a healthier relationship than I did before I deleted it. Yeah. And also I found myself trying to curate more of what I see. Yeah. I've also just set timers on social media too, so I can't use it as much.
That's good.
And I think, I think that's definitely helpful. Yeah. What I've actually found is that like Facebook, don't miss it all. Don't have it.
No, totally.
Twitter, I only really use to get like news. And so I find it's valuable for like, if I'm watching the NBA finals and somebody rolled their ankle, I can type in Jokic rolled ankle and see the clip and be like, okay, I see he rolled his ankle. He should be all right. Yeah. So I think that part's very valuable about it. Yeah. But overall, I feel like Instagram's the most addictive. TikTok doesn't get me. I don't know. Okay. I don't know why, but for me, TikTok's not very addictive.
Interesting. Yeah, that's funny. I thought TikTok was the dumbest thing ever. And then I've kind of been playing around with a couple TikTok pages. And I've been fortunate enough to have a couple successes with a couple random accounts that I run on TikTok. And as a result, like, you're kind of like, oh, I'm going to do some research. Like, I'm going to spend some time on TikTok for research purposes. So I'm a creator on TikTok now or whatever. And then you find yourself just like kind of like doing a scroll and you're just like, man, I'm on here for a long time, like a lot longer than I should be for sure. So I thought TikTok wouldn't get me. And it kind of, I found it kind of wrapping me into their spell a little bit more as of the last few months. Unfortunately, I need to set those timers though, like you said. I like that method.
But something you did mention was the healthy relationship between not just consuming. Yeah. You're creating stuff on there.
True.
That's huge. That's it. For me, since I started making YouTube videos, even when my YouTube videos would get like 50 or 100 views, I all of a sudden felt like this connection and this curiosity to be like, well, what's this person doing? Yeah. Oh, they're doing that. They have a transition that at the start of their video. Oh, I see that they're doing this technique to hook the viewers. It gives you like this much more back and forth relationship instead of just it consuming you and you're just consuming the content. Yeah. I think Instagram is probably that would be my thing where I'd like to put like more of myself out there on Instagram so that my friends that I haven't seen in a while can feel connected. And then there can be more of this commenting back and forth as opposed to just silently consuming. I think the silent consumption is probably the worst way to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's where those like depressive thoughts kind of get in because you're comparing yourselves. And like one of the things I mentioned on the podcast was like we're comparing our insides, like the way we feel inside to other people's outsides. And obviously, you know, everybody's heard this a million times at this point, and this has kind of been regurgitated over and over. But it's like people are putting their best moments on Instagram and on Facebook and on wherever for you to see. So like naturally, it's not going to be a fair comparison to be like, oh, I feel sad today, and so they're in Greece and they look like they're having a great time. And it's like, well, yeah, but 1 week before that they were like
always in Greece.
I know. It's like a week before that they were like in a physically abusive situation with like their spouse, and they're not taking like beautiful pictures in Greece with, pretending like their life is perfect. It's like people got so much crap going on. It's you never really know what's going on behind the scenes.
Yeah, and then like, you know, the Tiger Woods thing. Whenever all of a sudden that curtain gets pulled,
dude,
and it's like, oh,
you're like, this guy's perfect. This guy's perfect. And you're like, oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he literally was perfect, right? It was perfect.
I know, man. Look at Zion Williamson right now.
Yeah, Zion Williamson, he's in a whole nother league of trouble.
I know. It's like, he seemed, I was like, not Zion. But I mean, I don't know. But, he got caught up, man. He got caught up.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I mean, you know, I thought the one that I really think about is, what was his name who did the traveling show where it was about cooking? He was friends with Joe Rogan. It was about food from around the world. Anthony Bourdain. I mean, you like looked at that guy and you're like, this guy has the best life.
Yeah.
And then I watched the Anthony Bourdain, like, what was it? Uncensored or whatever. It was called Roadrunner. It was a documentary on him called Roadrunner. Fantastic. But it gave you a look behind the curtain. You were like, oh, this guy was really struggling.
Yeah, totally.
And that's the exact opposite as you would expect him from watching a show.
Yeah. Like Robin Williams, another example. It's just, you never know what's going on in people's lives. It's like, but like you said, back to the social media thing. It's like, for whatever reason, there is a tangible difference in the way I feel after I post on social media and then interact with other people's posts. Like, so I encourage people, like, you have something interesting going on in your life that you can probably showcase. So like if you're just somebody who's just on Instagram all the time, just like only looking at other people's stuff or whatever, you're on TikTok or you're on Twitter or whatever, like just throw a couple things out there in the world. And just, you know, even if it doesn't do great in terms of like the analytics and the numbers behind it, it's like, even if you get a couple of positive reactions, it's like, it really, really changes the way you interact with those apps.
Yeah, dude, the overwhelming response to any YouTube video I've posted, no matter how bad it was, has been overwhelmingly positive. They're all overwhelmingly positive, you know, and occasionally somebody says something like, you're stupid, you have no idea what you're talking about.
That's the direction you were going to go, because it's so funny. It's so funny because there's even if you get like 1% of the comments are like somebody just talking absolute shit to you, it's like, it weighs on you a little bit more, but then you just take a step back and be like, all right, you know what? Most people love this. Like, there's a reason why I'm getting a ton of followers right now and stuff. These are just like hurt people who are just like having a horrible day that are trying to just ruin your day. Yeah.
See, I enjoy it because I comment back.
Okay.
And if their name is Robert Smith, I say, thanks for the loving words, Bobby.
Yeah.
You know, just let them know.
Yeah. Thanks, Rob.
I think that's the best way to go about it.
Exactly.
So, yeah. Well, let's get back to the pod.
Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
No. The one, maybe the best takeaway I got from this was an exercise that they had come up with. Mm-hmm. And it was making a list of the 10 people who are like the center of your social life, right? So your 10 closest people in your life, and write down how frequently you are in contact with that person. Mm-hmm. And then is that relationship either energizing or depleting, right?
Yeah.
And so the frequency, you'll realize that you probably aren't actually seeing that person in person enough for the majority of them. Mm-hmm. And that was definitely my takeaway. The other thing is like, you realize the energizing versus depleting makes you think like, one, is this person somebody I should really have in my life? And then they actually talked about that in the podcast, because they said, well, if that relationship feels depleting, maybe it's you. Like maybe you need to work on that relationship. And a lot of times that will fix it.
Yeah.
And then they said sometimes, you know, if you will naturally weed those people out, and you may realize the depleting relationships you aren't seeing as frequently.
Yeah.
And the host of the podcast, he said that if he would have done it maybe 10 or 15 years ago, half the people in that 10 may have been depleting. And he says now just naturally, it's almost gotten to everybody being energizing. I think that's what you want to build out, is a group of relatively about 10 people that you see frequently, and all those relationships are energizing. I think that's a solid goal.
Yeah, totally. And I think what you said, like if it's not beneficial to you, maybe like kind of end that relationship. It's not like you have to be like aggressive about it. You have to be like, hey man, we haven't been talking a lot the last 4 years. I just want to let you know I'm cutting you out of my life. Like, you don't have to be like aggressive. You know what I mean? You don't have to be like too crazy with it.
You're depleting, man. Yeah. You're draining me. Yeah, you're out of here.
Draining me. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like you kind of let it kind of slowly taper off and just kind of put it in the back burner and be like, you know what? If they reach out, I'll be cordial, whatever. But you know, I'm not going to put in a ton of energy and effort to try to hang out with this person or do whatever. So yeah,
people also change too. So it's like there's some people that are out of your life and then come back in. They're different and they're much more enjoyable to be around. So like, I definitely think being open to that as well.
Oh, totally. Yeah, man. Yeah. That's absolutely 100% true. Kind of on the same, kind of in the same realm as that, I was listening to, so the same host, he had Rick Rubin on as a podcast guest recently.
Legend.
Yeah. Rick Rubin, legendary music producer, did a lot of rock and hip hop and metal and really all genres of albums. I know he's worked with like Kanye and stuff recently, but he's also worked with like Beastie Boys and I want to say like Run DMC and groups like that back in the day.
Jay-Z.
Yeah, Jay-Z, a big one too, obviously. He's really worked with everyone, but he kind of talked about on this podcast, you can always make a change at the end of the day. Like, you're not limited. Like, people get so caught up in their own individual world. And it's like, if you're in a situation where like you don't like where you live, you can move. If you're in a relationship and you've fallen out of love, like you can always end that relationship because it's not benefiting you or the other person that you're with. If you have a job that you don't like, you can always change your job. Like, these are things that you can truly change at the end of the day. And it's like, you can just step out of your zone a little bit and kind of enter a new zone. You can totally change your life as well. So I know that was kind of something in that same realm. Like I said,
people feel artificially stuck.
Oh, 100%, man.
People make up this thing that like they are stuck. You're not. And then the other thing too, is like, for some reason, people think that they can change their physical body. They can exercise and eat right and lose weight, become healthier, do a bunch of bicep curls and get big arms. But for some reason, people don't feel that way about their emotions. Yeah. Or they don't feel that way about themselves mentally. Yeah. And it's like, no, those emotions and your mental abilities they're just muscles. Yeah. The neurons in your brains, they behave like muscles. And you just iron out those pathways in your brain. You can go from somebody that's negative to somebody that's positive. You can go from somebody that's depressed to somebody that's happy just by exercising those pathways in your brain.
Oh, totally. And another thing that he talked about was like, it a lot of times takes courage to kind of get that process initiated. But like, if you're willing to jump into a new situation, like you can really, really change your life. And I know you and I both were kind of in interesting situations. I think you probably a little bit more than me growing up. You guys moved around a lot, but you guys moved a ton when you were young, it sounds like. And, I moved a decent amount as well. And, I've lived in a lot of different places, a lot more than a lot of our closer friends. A lot of our friends here have lived here their whole lives. But I think it's interesting, like, I think growing up and realizing like, oh, you can almost like foster whatever relationships you want with whatever kind of people you want in every city. Like, you can have different relationships with different people in every city. Like, if you want, you know what I mean? Like, the kind of person you are around your friends from high school is totally different than the person that you are when you're around your friends from college, for example, or your friends from work. And it's like, those relationships can like bring out interesting parts of yourself that you don't even realize that you always have. Sometimes you get so locked into like, oh, I am this type of person. And it's like, well, maybe you're that type of person in that social situation, but like, you really have a capacity to probably do a lot more than you're currently doing if you just kind of shift your environment up a little bit. So, I mean, folks who haven't lived other places or maybe taken some chances in life, like, I definitely encourage them to go ahead and try something new and just make a small change. And I think you can be really, really drastically surprised at, how much your life can change, for sure.
Well, I also think if you don't have several good relationships, right? If you just have one really strong relationship, but you don't have any relationships with anybody else, you behave one way around your spouse, but you behave differently around your best friends from high school.
Yep.
You behave differently when you're with your buddies that you play pickup basketball with on Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
You know, and I think if you don't kind of nourish each of that part of your personality, I think you'll become unhappy. I think you'll feel like you're not being your total self.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really important to like nourish all those parts of your personality by spending time and building strong relationships with a wide variety of people.
Yeah, man. So I guess speaking about, people's ability to make changes, I know that one thing that was really interesting is the host of the podcast mentioned that he was part of like a study, I guess, a while back where he would actually go and live in people's houses with them for like 4 to 6 weeks. And this guy's a medical doctor. So he would live with them and then like see their lives through the perspective of a doctor and really be able to like, I guess, see the connections of like, oh, this person's relationship, you know, they came to me and they have this issue. They're like, whatever, they have anxiety or stress. And it's like, oh, I can totally see how this person's problems are being exacerbated by their relationship at home and how they interact with the people around them. So I thought that was like one of the most fascinating things. Like, how often do people like get to fully immerse themselves in somebody's life like that? I don't know. It was just, that was really, really crazy to me.
You don't, man.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, also you can't, it's hard for us to like separate ourselves from our own life and like be a fly on the wall and imagine like how we're living and seeing how that's impacting our overall health. Whereas like this random person comes into your house and essentially is dropped into your environment and then gets to give you feedback on what's going on.
Yeah.
I could see how that'd be very helpful, but also like, it seems like a reality TV show.
Oh, yeah, I know. It really does. It really does. I would love to see that, honestly. Yeah. I'm surprised like TLC hasn't picked that up or something yet. You know what I mean? Like a doctor moves in.
It's like Dr. House, but Dr. Home.
Yeah, exactly. Dr. Home. I love that. You go live with people for 4 to 6 weeks. That would be a fascinating show. I bet the people who were involved in that show, like their life would probably change pretty drastically, I would imagine. Because you can only hide your true self from somebody for so long if you're like living with them. You know what I mean? Yeah. I don't know, that'd be crazy. Yeah,
I think it'd be really funny. You just like walk downstairs in the morning, your doctor's sitting down there drinking coffee. It's like, hey, what's up? Heard you and your wife arguing last night. You want to tell me more about it?
Yeah, let me take your blood pressure. Yeah, exactly. That's perfect. I love it, man. But no, I mean, we kind of transition to, I guess I want you to maybe talk about maybe what are the actual health effects of poor relationships. I know we talked about like positive relationships and how those can affect you. I know we talked about like, the cigarettes and, you know, how it can have more of a negative effect on your, I guess, overall health. But like I said, you can maybe talk about what are the actual health effects of having those poor relationships beyond just what we already talked about.
I was doing research on this, trying to figure out what the actual studies say are the poor effects on your health from bad relationships. And so there's a couple that I saw that were interesting. One study said that what they labeled as adverse close relationships led to 34% increase in risk of heart disease, which is a large number. And then another study showed that what they had this metric of social integration. And they said that low social integration leads to somewhere between 2 to 4 times the risk of age-adjusted death when compared to high social integration. And so I think there's a couple factors that play into this. One, if you have great relationships and you're happier overall, then you're going to have lower sympathetic activation. So, you know, you have your parasympathetic, which is like the rest and digest. And then you have your sympathetic system, which is the fight or flight, you know, and those cause, whenever your sympathetic system is activated, it causes increase in cortisol, which we know is associated with stress, right? Increased blood pressure, which increased blood pressure over a long period of time, heart disease, stroke, all those risks, right? And so I also think that these poor socially integrated, you know, people likely had poor sleep. They probably had higher levels of increase in alcohol and drug abuse. And that's been shown over and over again. People that are depressed and lonely tend to lean on things like alcohol and drugs. And then they also probably had decreased physical activity. And a lot of people get most of their physical activity in social ways, since a lot of people don't exercise. And one of the best things I was reading about this was Eliud Kipchoge, who's the world record marathon runner. He's the fastest marathon runner ever. Never trains alone. Never trains alone.
No, it doesn't surprise me at all, to be honest. I mean, you also need somebody to push you there. And I don't know. I see a ton of benefits from that.
Yeah.
And also just holds you accountable. Just holds you accountable in general. Like, I don't know, having somebody else that you know is relying on you to show up, like that just makes it easier to want to do the right things, I guess, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just, and then there's all the fun little things that happen whenever you're, with people that you may not consider part of the relationship, but there's so many fun things that happen as a result of being social.
Oh, totally. Yeah, man. I think, I know like for me in general, like when you see people walking, it's usually not alone. They usually like have a dog with them, or they're with like their spouse or significant other, right? Like they're just having that social interaction on the walk is like a motivating factor for you, I think, for sure. Like I know if I didn't walk with my girlfriend through the neighborhood, I probably wouldn't go for walks. So we go for walks every day. And it's like, otherwise I don't think I would do that. I'd probably maybe feel pressure to be like, oh, people don't want to like drive by and say, like, who's this lonely guy walking on the road by himself? You know what I mean? And it's like, it's probably more of an insecurity that I have, but I don't know, like those relationships, if you have positive ones, like, I don't know, especially where you can kind of give each other shit if you're not working out and hold each other accountable and like in a healthy way, obviously. They're really, really,
it's like, I don't want to go to the gym today. It's like, no, I want to go to the gym. All right, let's go to the gym. I guess I'll go, you know? No, exactly. The other thing too is having a dog, right?
Yeah.
So when we got George, we walk him every single day and we take him on a long walk. So we're doing a long walk every single day.
Yeah, man.
And, sometimes in the Ohio winters, that's not easy, but you feel better even when it's horrible outside, freezing, snowing, you feel a lot better after you do it. Yeah,
no, totally, man.
Yeah.
I always try to think of things like from a perspective of like introverts versus extroverts and like relationships and whatnot. And like I'm a person who I've taken like the personality test and I'm like always on the border. Like I feel like on some days I'll test as an introvert, on other days I'll test as an extrovert. So I would say I'm probably an introverted extrovert or an extroverted introvert on any given day. It kind of just depends on what's going on. So I guess, I don't know, from your perspective, do you think that, I guess, introverts receive like the same level of benefit from having these positive relationships as extroverts do?
Yeah, I was thinking about that too, because they didn't clarify it in the podcast, or from what I understand their study, I don't think they clarified that. But my guess is it pertains more, introversion, extroversion can pertain more to how people do in like groups of people that they aren't familiar with.
Yeah.
I would guess that, there's a lot of people, who are introverted. When you get them in a group of people that everybody's comfortable with, that you would never be able to tell that they are introverted.
Yeah.
And so I'm a hardcore extrovert. So it doesn't bother me being in situations of a bunch of people that I don't know. Yeah. And I would imagine that's like the biggest thing. I think there's a little bit of like being played up in our society about how being an introvert, you may just be an introvert. And that may convince people to not put as much effort into these close social relationships.
Yeah.
So I think that regardless of if you're introverted, if you're extroverted, you should really try to nurture these close relationships specifically.
Yeah, no, totally. I think another thing they talked about, which I'm not sure how much I believe this can be changed about a person necessarily, but they talked about like physical exercise and about how like that's emphasized in schools, for example. Like you got like your PE programs, you got recess, things that are obviously good for your physical well-being. Like you talked about it earlier, like obviously, people associate positive health outcomes with physical exercise, but in terms of like socio-emotional well-being, there's not really anything to really help people grow socio-emotionally, I guess. So really overall, just like your I don't know, the way that you interact with others and like the feelings that you get and how you process those feelings from those interactions. And, they didn't get too much into this, but I would assume that some of that is just God-given, but also I would imagine a lot of that is determined in your like very early, like formative years. Like I've, been lucky enough to see some kids that are close to me grow up over, and you kind of start to realize like, oh, like the way that they were interacting with others at like age 2 and 3 and 4, like really kind of determined the rest of their life in terms of how well they were able to interact with other people. Just seeing some kids grow up that are close to me. And it's like, I kind of took like an introspective approach to that. I'm like, thinking back to my life at that age and like, how fortunate I was to have parents who like really, encourage social interaction with others, whether it was just like setting up dates to like you know, hang out with other kids or getting involved in youth sports and things like that too. So it's like, you know, from your opinion, like how much of your kind of socio-emotional well-being, like that kind of learning of how to interact with others, like, are you a believer in like that can be changed, or what do you think?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think it can be, and I think it becomes harder as you get older.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a friend of mine. He had a daughter during COVID, and it was right at the start of COVID, I believe. And his daughter was like 3 years old. She really wasn't doing well socially. She wasn't talking as much as she would. Her vocabulary wasn't as good. Now, this guy, he's a physician. His wife was really intelligent too. And so it didn't really make sense that their completely healthy baby wasn't doing well socially.
Yeah.
And they took her to speech therapists, and she was improving a little bit. Whenever they got to a point during COVID when they said, like, this is just becoming too detrimental, we need to put her in daycare. And if she gets sick, she gets sick. They took her to daycare, and he said within the first month at daycare, she just like completely changed.
Yeah.
Just completely blossomed socially. Her speech was never better. And all of a sudden she went from being behind on these like developmental metrics to past on all of them, like, you know, past the baseline on all of them. Yeah. And I actually see this a lot with pediatric patients of mine that I see that have, you know, different diseases that make them not develop as fast. And so they will not get into school as early as some other kids. They can't move around as well as other kids. And so as a result, they aren't as socially involved as other kids. But whenever they do get to that age where they eventually can become socially involved, their parents are always blown away by how much they blossom, you know, how much they grow so fast. And so I think these things can be taught, and it's imperative to teach them early.
Yes.
But I think that as you get older, you can without a doubt change these things. It just requires much more work. And that just comes down to kids being plastic. You know, their brains don't have those hardwired connections yet. They're very, very plastic. They can change.
Yeah.
And then again, like just the overall curiosity of kids.
Yeah.
Curiosity is huge. Kids will try everything. That's how they figure out how to walk. That's how they open and shut doors, just slam them repeatedly just to figure out how doors work out of cabinets, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think if we don't approach as adults our lives with that much curiosity, but I think if we do, we can make a lot of these changes that we maybe don't think we're capable of.
No, for sure. I think curiosity, like you said, is huge. And especially it's like curiosity in other people, like taking like really taking like a genuine interest in what other people have to say, and like asking them to expand on things. Like people love talking about themselves. Like if you're a person who's not good at interacting with other people, it's like my default thing. And I'm probably lucky in the fact that I'm just like very naturally curious. Like I love meeting new people and just like asking them about like painstaking, like intricate details about what it is they're going through or what it is they do for a living, or like, and it's not like a place of like awkwardness. Like I'm like genuinely curious. It's not like I'm like trying to like continue a conversation that's dead. It's like I just love learning about other people. So it's like folks who maybe are not as good at communicating with people, it's like try to just take an interest in what people are saying. And like, I don't know, sometimes we get so in our own heads about like wanting to talk about ourselves in conversation and stuff, and like maybe show off to other people, but like people love whenever you just take a genuine interest in them. So like, I don't know, I know that's easier like, said than done for sure, but it's just so true.
Yeah. And the thing is too, like when you ask why, and you figure out why people think certain things, why people are doing certain things, like most of the times you get to the end, you're like, oh yeah, like I can understand why you think that. Even if it's like politics or something you disagree with, you start to ask them why, and then you realize like, oh, I can see why you believe that or why you think that. And I can see why, why you behave a certain way.
Totally.
But yeah, what's really interesting is once you start to realize that pretty much everybody has a story that's fascinating.
Oh, totally.
And most people think they're super boring, but it's like, nah, everybody's boring, or everybody thinks they're boring, but like everybody's life is interesting.
Yeah. No doubt, man. It was definitely a good process to kind of go through this and kind of think about my own life, think about my own relationships, and kind of think about those things I want to foster with people, and you know, people I want to get back in touch with and whatnot. I know that you kind of have an interesting kind of exercise here to kind of wrap this up in terms of just encouraging people maybe to try to rekindle old relationships and whatnot.
Yeah. Well, first off, that exercise that we went over earlier.
Yeah. Right? Oh yeah, please.
Write out 10 people's names, how frequently you're seeing them, and then try to foster that, right? Try to get that frequency to increase, and then see who's giving you the energy and who's more draining relationship. But these things, I heard a phrase the other day, and it kind of explains everything in health. And it's just simple, not easy. Like, these things are simple, but they're not easy, and they require work to do. So one thing that they said at the end of that podcast was to pull out your phone and call or text someone that you miss, or call or text someone that you used to be close with that you haven't seen in a while. And I know I have buddies that do this to me, and I do it to them. One of my friends, Tyler, he lives over in Germany. He's in the Air Force. So we don't see each other anymore. But every now and then, you know, it's like once a week, once every 2 weeks, it's like, hey, miss you, man. Hope you're doing well. And now that him and his wife are moving back to the States, that's a relationship that is going to take off right back where it was and just hit the ground running. And then I also think for people, like we talked about, it's never too late to rebuild those relationships. And usually by just taking these steps of reaching out, trying to see people more frequently, you can take these relationships that used to be good and rebuild them. So that's my ask for everybody who's listening, is to pull out your phone and call or text somebody that you miss, you haven't seen in a while.
Yeah, I love it.
And otherwise, you know, if you have stuck around this long, definitely subscribe below and leave us a comment about what you think about are some of the troubles that you have with connecting with those around you and building these strong relationships, especially in a world that's changing as rapidly as it is now. Yeah. Otherwise, you know, that's all I got. Sam, you got anything else?
I'm good, brother. I think we covered it.
All right, man. Well, it was good talking to you. Thanks for stopping by the podcast. This is the Prescription Press. We'll see you next time.